From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It wasn't an easy legislative session for House Speaker Gordon Fox.
I got done giving what I thought was a speech to bring us together, and I'm asked if I want cake. Do I want cake?
What does
I
that
can't
have to do
be
with the bill?
any more offended.
Throw the cake in the
25
garbage, then.
cakes.
Throw it in the
We should
garbage.
throw it all
And
in the
if I didn't
garbage.
give you
We are
cake,
here
you'd
to
be
do
saying I
the
didn't feed you.
people's business. The
You are out of
people's
order.
business.
Sit down, Representative. You're out of order.
Despite the bickering, the Speaker was successful in getting same-sex marriage passed, but post-session headaches continue. A House Oversight Committee is exploring the never-ending saga of 38 studios, and lawmakers may have to revisit the historic and contentious pension reform law. Will Fox continue to rule the rostrum? This week on Newsmakers, House Speaker Gordon Fox.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Speaker, welcome back to the program, and thanks for joining us.
Quite an intro.
It was a memorable night. It really let them eat cake. All right, look,
that's the theme of the session.
First, and mainly for our viewers at home, the last time you were on this program, we did an exhaustive show on 38 studios. Basically, it was a what did you know and when did you know it kind of a program. So I'm not looking to rehash all of that, and if you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. I'll provide a link under the Newsmakers header. But there has been some new developments. So let's start with 38 studios. The House Oversight Committee is conducting hearings on 38 studios. Some people are calling for the committee to issue subpoenas to compel testimony and to unearth more documentation. Now, to do that, they need you to literally sign off on those subpoenas. Should you even be deciding whether or not to issue subpoenas when you are friends with a key player in this, lawyer Michael Corso, and you were frankly someone who had a role in making it all happen?
Well, it's pursuant to the rules. I mean, you follow the rules, pursuant to the House rules, that there are subpoenas for standing committees. Oversight, which we made a standing committee, has that power, but there's always, you want to review this. And part of the rules is with the permission, express written permission of the Speaker of the House.
But you could recuse yourself, couldn't you?
And I could, and I've not thought about it, because you first have to get to the question where, I mean, it's one of those buzz things, and Alan, you're an attorney, subpoena people in. Now, we know there's a civil legal suit going on. We now learn, I learned from you folks, there's an SEC investigation, and what that's about, when we don't know. We know that there's trustees looking at things through bankruptcy court. By the end of the day, and by the way, with the oversight, we have started that in House leadership to do oversight of the 38 studios, looking at really what led up to the decision making from the board's perspective as to how did the loan get decided, how did the terms get decided, and then thereafter between 2010 to when they approved the loan in 2013, when I got the infamous call of we're bankrupt with Governor Chafee, what happened in 3 years. So that's what this is really looking at. Now, I know that it's been prompted and it makes for good theater, like we want to subpoena people in. It's a tool that we use in legal practice. At this point, and I haven't spoken to the chairman directly of it, I've read some of his remarks he's given to Ted and others, that in terms of trying to find the evidence, looking at the documents, they've been given the documents, that EDC's been cooperated. Part of robust oversight, which did not exist before my tenure as Speaker, is part of you have to look at, rather than doing document dumps, you have to take sort of an excising view of this, get the documents, look at those documents. That's what they're doing now. If then they find that you need that somebody said something was wrong or gave you something that's proven to be untruthful, subpoena might be the tool to use. But at this point, I think it's premature. They're just going through and there's reams of documents. And now, some people say, well, we didn't know anything about the SEC investigation. Why didn't they give those documents? The request wasn't looking at what their legal expenses are after the fact. Oversight will do that, whether finance does that oversight or not. But we ingrained in this, we have to understand is we are committed under my leadership to a robust oversight process that never happened before, that you're going to do forensic, not only of them, we're looking at Board of Elections,
Speaker,
we're looking at right here.
You have ties to this deal, and you handpicked the chairman of the very committee that's overseeing this, Representative Michael Marcello. So why not call for an independent investigation, if for nothing else, the perception of it all?
Because are you ever going to satisfy the perception?
Well,
is it really going to lead to anything? And so at this point, and again, I'm not ruling anything out, and neither is the chairman. Let the oversight process take its course. Let the civil suit run its course. Let other investigations run its course. Rather than we come in there, we're going to satisfy someone's perception, and we know all that leads to, well, they came and testified, but they refused to testify, so we want to compel them. We want contempt orders. You'll get caught up more in that process than actually finding out what oversight's supposed to be about. Learn from what happened so you don't repeat the mistake, and try to come up with different policies and practices to make for a healthier government.
All right.
That's what an oversight committee does.
I want to play something for you here. We had Representative Patrick O'Neill on the show in March. He was part of your inner circle at one time. And if we could play a soundbite for you, Arlene Violet had a question for him about 38 Studios and what you knew. Let's take a listen to that.
So do you think Gordon Fox did know this $75 million was earmarked for Kurt Schilling and deliberately withheld telling you as part of the leadership team?
I think that he did know, in my opinion. I think there was a meeting in March of 2010 where 5 people got together, Mr. Corso, Fox, Mr. Schilling, there's 2 of them, Mr. Stokes, and another individual from 38 Studios. Tom Zakic, correct. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that room. I do get the feeling, though, that we were left in the dark about that.
That was Representative Patrick O'Neill on Newsmakers in March. We were left in the dark on that, and I do think he did know. Respond.
I mean, at first, I don't know what Patty knows what went on in a meeting or whatnot when he wasn't there. And obviously there's an element of self-serving going on there because, of course, I mean, it's in Patty's best interest that I'm the epitome of evil and wickedness. It was one of those conundrums that we have a program we're putting through, and I've said it repeatedly, and I don't know how many more ways to say, I knew Kurt Schilling was interested in coming to Rhode Island. I knew Kurt Schilling, you're hearing it live, folks, that was interested in $75 million, but I took it as we'll create programs, let the people who are supposed to be vested with the intelligence, articulation, getting the details done to see if that man was a company was eligible for $1 or for nothing.
I'm sorry, did you say you knew that he was interested in $75 million?
What an amount was. I knew he was interested in here and coming getting a loan guarantee.
Did you ask him at that meeting? All right, how much are we talking about here, Kurt?
No, because the first meeting that Kurt Schilling had with me was, I'm interested in looking at Rhode Island, what tools are available? I don't know. In that first meeting where it was another member of the EDC was there. It was like, introduce him to what programs do you have? That was it. And then it was like, go and talk amongst yourselves. Now, someone can say then you can construe that I was manipulating something, and then I manipulated a loan guarantee, knowing all the time that Kurt Schilling's going to be, and somehow I manipulated the board of directors of none of whom I ever spoke to about the deal into doing all of this stuff to give him $75 million. I didn't do it.
Did you ask why from $50 million to $125 million?
That was part of it, and part of the question was they needed room. That we were hearing that, and I've said this before, and you said we didn't want to regurgitate all this stuff from the last day, was you needed room, and all the economic development experts were saying, create a program, trust the people that you would apply to do that, live within separation of powers, and let them vet it, create a program. At the time when we had banks not doing financing, unemployment through the roof, that we didn't know if it was going to stop at 12.9 or go up to 20% unemployment, at the same time when everyone's saying you have to build a different economy with knowledge-based economy that's not built upon tools that were there were based upon old ways of manufacturing, loan guarantees, heavy equipment, personal guarantees, those kind of stuff. So part of it was maybe the perfect storm for something bad to happen. Speaker, and I've beaten myself up over this and will continue to beat myself up over this in terms of what could we done, what should we done, and that's what leads to this robust oversight. For 3 years, this program was allowed, this company where no one was looking at it, and I think the legislature, I personally take fault for that piece of it as well, that we weren't calling people and say, so are you talking to people about this loan? Are you talking to people about any loans? It wasn't happening, and we didn't know that. So shame on us too. But that's why we changed it, and that's why we have a robust oversight committee now meeting at my behest, my creation, to make sure that it's not only about 38 studios, yes it's 38 studios, but it's like what else is happening out there that we don't know about, that we should know about.
Speaker, as Tim said, we have a lot of different things going on around. We want to ask about things that aren't 38 Studios as well. There's a lot of buzz right now that there might be a settlement coming in the pension lawsuit.
I've heard.
And Senate President Pivewheat has expressed concern about that because it sounds like there would be some refashioning of the law your chambers passed, and it would be handed back to you and to Senate President Pivewed and say, pass this as a new version of the pension law. Are you concerned about that?
Absolutely, I'm concerned about it. I mean, as you do, you know, we've dealt pensions, and there's all sorts of different variables. We were presented different variables in terms of creating reform. And again, I'll go back to the pension reform it was a heart-wrenching situation that you're faced with the future economic stability of this state, knowing that people were promised things in the past that you just can't afford anymore. That you have billions of dollars in unfunded liability, you have annual retirement contributions in the multiple hundreds of millions. That money goes into that program. It doesn't go to education. It doesn't go into roads and development.
Law.
So we had to do it based upon those variables. You change those variables. We know we've saved $3 billion from the unfunded liability. 1 year alone, $275 million in savings. If there's changes, to what degree? And what do the variables look like? And what does it do to erode those savings? And who pays that price? As well as the fact is, it's a very heart-wrenching situation. And if it comes back to the House and the Senate, it's not going to be about, let's review what their settlement might be. You reopen the whole pension. It's a law. We're not at the table negotiating this, nor should we be. But once you reopen pension, you reopen it all. And then, as Senate President Pivewed talked about, then you start to re-educate people. I have 16 members in my house that never dealt with it. They're brand new. What are those people then voting on? Do we go through? You remember, this was a process started the November before. We went all the way through doing research and bringing in expert analysts to make sure we're doing the least we have to do to make for a healthy system.
So if this settlement comes back, it wouldn't just be a one, all right, vote up or down, are we done? There'd be debates, I
think, because you know the way the legislature works, every representative has a right to put an amendment in. Every representative has a right to demand that we do anything. And how do you stop them without me looking like the imperial speaker says all we can vote on is this? How do you control that? Nor should you control it, because that's what democracy details. So there's a lot of anxiety over, and we're not part of it. There is a gag order, so I don't know what terms they're talking about. You have to, one, look at from the fiscal side of it, what are the variables changing, what is the cost of the over long-term reform, and what do you bring in terms of how you get that done is not a simple exercise.
Speaking of Imperial, I want to go back to 38 Studios a moment, because there were reports that you actually promised Wall Street that no matter what, the state of Rhode Island would back those bonds with the full faith and credit of the state. You're the speaker. I know you have a lot of power, but isn't that imperial of you to make those representations? Because if you can bind everybody that way, why should they ever show up and vote? We should just send you there.
Just like you know, being an attorney, why police reports aren't admissible in court. When you have people taking notes in a meeting, some stuff gets left out.
Did you promise that?
I went into a meeting at the request of the governor, EDC, and the first thing, and I didn't see it in those reports, was like, I hope you know, I, as a speaker, can't bind this legislature, and I clearly can't bind a future legislature. But the one thing we're known for is when we have debts, we pay our debts, and that's what we do. And I thought, quite frankly, what am I going to this for? But, you know, again, being a helpful speaker, trying to... what am I promising? It's not a promise, that's reality, because I can't bind
this legislature. So in fact, you were misquoted. You're saying they didn't give the full context.
I don't think they gave the full context, nor when I looked at that was floated around and people handed it to me. Nowhere in it says, and I remember the things he's saying, I can't bind this legislature on my own, nor can I ever bind a future legislature. But there is a history, and the alpha beta thing I think I quoted is that Rhode Island, the RISDIC, that you mean when we pay our debts, we stop from that present.
How often do you do this with investors?
That was the only time I've ever been able to ask to do it. And in retrospect, I will never do it again. But it was the first and only time I'd ever been, and I thought it was a weird response, quite frankly, a request.
And didn't it raise a red flag that you were even asked to do it?
Well, no, because I think if this, in the speaker I am today from the speaker I was in February 2010 when I took over is a different person.
All right.
And right now, I probably would not have done it, but hindsight is 2020.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. When we come back, we're going to discuss the speaker's future and the Constitutional Convention. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ted Nesi and Arlene Violet. Our guest this week is House Speaker Gordon Fox. And by the way, going into the break, I should have said the potential of a constitutional convention. I don't know of anyone being scheduled. Ted.
Speaker, I want to play some sound from Governor Lincoln Chafee, who obviously just announced he's not going to run for re-election. One of the striking things to the reporters who were there was when he talked about the need for a constitutional convention. And I think that we have that. Let's listen.
Well, I think we should have a very intellectual dialogue about our structure of government here in Rhode Island. It's critical. It's more critical probably than anything else that we're talking about. Structure of EDC, whether it's a Commerce Department, it pales in comparison to the structure of our government. I think more the structural power, line item veto powers, shift a little more towards the executive.
In his elliptical Link Chafee way, he was saying, he thinks there should be a shift, more power away from your chambers, the legislature, toward the executive. I can imagine personally you might not love that idea, but what do you think of his point? His point is that it's not balanced. What do you think of that?
I mean, that's government. Government is a living, breathing thing, and it's always a time. I said, like, with legislation, everything's revisitable, and that's why we had the separation of powers debate. I mean, separation of powers used to be handled in the legislature by put a couple of your fellow representatives on a board and commission and hope they're going to report back to us, and look, RISDIC and all of that stuff. So the separation of powers movement was born, which I think shifted a lot more control to an executive, and that was a reform that was done. So should you have an intellectual discussion about the way government should? I think it's always appropriate, and I think that's what you do every day when we're making bills. He referenced the economic development. I mean, everyone's like, why didn't you do something now? You did stuff long term, but I think the structure does matter. I think the process does matter, and that's an example of change in structure of government that I think is going to lead to good things, but there's other things there that may be discussed in the Constitutional Convention or not. I'm open to a discussion about it. Hadn't really given it a lot of thought because we've got a lot of stuff on the plate still, but it's something down the road, but we'll talk about it.
Are you open to supporting one?
I could be convinced. I could be convinced, because ultimately, remember, it's about putting it on the ballots, and it's about the people choosing if they want to constitute, because there was 10 years ago, I believe it was put on there and rejected. So it's ultimately the people, and it is the people's government.
As you know, the city of Providence receives federal funds for small business loans, et cetera. Since 2004, you've been doing closings as an attorney, and most of those closings are done with those federal funds. In 2010, I guess you had to get your own vendor's license, because before then it was going through Josh Tevereau. But in light of the fact that federal funds were used, are you willing to disclose the amount of monies that you made as a closing attorney under that program?
Not a lot of monies. Under the program, obviously there's attorney confidentiality issues that we always deal with, but in terms of disclosing, I think people can disclose. I think there's public records requests. Everything that I earn from this is disclosable through PDP. So I think that information is already available.
From 2004 to 2010,
well,
you would be willing to...
2005, in terms of what? In terms of when I was working with Josh Tevereau. I have no problem talking about those.
The Hummel report is reported that the FBI is looking into one of the closings that you did for a woman who had the phantom business, not you, the woman had an actual phantom business, and she used 127 Darrant Street, the building where your law firm is, as the address. Has the FBI contacted you? Yet.
Not at all.
And last but not least, you were listed under another Hummel report investigation as the agent to serve process for those corporations. Did you incorporate those corporations before these loans were closed?
There were a
would
couple
you perceive
of
that as a
them.
conflict of
And
interest,
I
being on both
weigh
sides of the issue?
conflicts all the time in terms of, in any closing I did for PDP, PDP was first and foremost. There were a couple of closings that were done that I had incorporated and hadn't done anything else, was still listed as the agent for service, as you know, in terms of the corporate documents. I'm comfortable that I've protected PDP's interests, have always, and you know how the loan process works. The loan process comes, I would get, and usually it used to go through Josh, that have closing terms that you have to make sure that they've given first position security in the mortgage and this, security interest. Everything that was a PEDP requirement was followed. And if they couldn't meet that after I did the title search and whatnot, it was kicked back to the loan committee to say, you gave this based upon your underwriting that this person can give you a second position. Well, they've already got 6 other liens on that property. So it wasn't my decision making in terms of the terms of the loan, the amount of loan. All it was the make sure that they're legally sufficient, that PDP's interests are protected. In every loan that I closed for PDP, that was first and foremost my concern, and I'm comfortable. I did my job as an attorney for PDP to protect their interests, and I don't think anyone can talk to even some of those loans that went bad loans, that they're not collectible because of the legal work's done. They may not be collectible because of the underwriting. They just can't pay.
There's a lot of talk at the State House about when's Gordon leaving? When is the Speaker retiring? He looks tired. He doesn't want this job anymore. He wants to get out. I want to first ask a simpler question. Do you plan to run for re-election in your district next year?
That's my plan right now.
Right now, you're planning to?
Well, let me see, keeping options open, because there's some talk about mayor in there and whatnot. And I don't want to be premature in this stuff. And again, it's your jobs to do this stuff. We've been talking about elections for months earlier. And I believe truly in my heart that there's a time to govern, there's a time to run for office. That's part of American democracy. And if you get so caught up on what's the next office you're looking at, I think it colors your decision making as to the job you're doing now. So what I will say, and I took your question wrong, is whether I tend to be Speaker in 2014, yes. Whether I'm going to run for re-election as State Representative, for Speaker of the House, for Mayor of Providence, I'm leaving everything open at this point. I've not made those decisions. I'm concentrating. You know, we have a lot of work going on at the House. We've got tax studies going on. We're studying tolls and roads and bridges. We've got looking at whether we should
one way to make it easier to govern
payments.
is by putting this stuff to bed, you know,
and
right?
that may be what I do.
On Newsmakers.
On Newsmakers.
That's what I really want.
You know, I've actually heard that probably unlikely that you're going to throw your hat in the ring for Mayor of Providence. I mean, what is it that you're going to have to decide?
Unless you're talking to my Marcus, I don't know who. Everyone knows what I'm probably going to do. But you also remember, to go back to your question, I got elected Speaker in February of 2010. March 2010, people were saying, so what's your next move? So it's just the nature of the beast.
What do you have to decide on in order to decide on the mayor of Providence?
Right now, I don't have to decide anything, but in terms of governing, in providing leadership in the House of Representatives, what goes in terms of deciding whether I'm going to run for Mayor of Providence, in terms of, it always comes down to, do I think I can add value?
So that's something you're really considering, or at least
it's in my head.
Okay.
I'll tell you that it's in my head, whether it's a forefront in my head or not. Any different day, any different whatnot, but it's always about that adding value. And one thing I will say about Governor Chafee, one of the quotes that he quoted about his father, it's always about wherever you do, leave it better than when you took it over. And so I'm concentrating now on when I'm not going to be Speaker, because I'm not one of these guys that wants to be the imperial Speaker for 10 years and do all this wonderful stuff for the power. I believe you get these jobs for a set period of time to get your agenda through, to really try to make the state better. I became Speaker in some really tumultuous times. It's just the way timing in politics works. But I really am, and I don't want to sound cliche, focusing on every issue seems to be so gnarly, and I used that word before here. But difficult, and trying to provide leadership with that is important, and that's what I'm focusing on.
When the governor made that quote, quoting his father, he was announcing that he wasn't running for re-election. That catch you by surprise?
It did catch me by surprise. And, you know, in terms of the switch to the Democratic Party, which coming from he'd been a Republican, then an independent, every indication that I had, in terms of we look at political, the sort of nuances that the governor was going to a lot of events, seemed to pick up the pace, was going to these events I was quite frankly surprised to see him at.
Did you talk to him
beforehand? No, I did not talk to him beforehand. So I thought, and I know that Link Chafee has a fight in him like nobody's business. So my plan with changing parties, going to sort of elevating the social aspect of the governorship, even more so, he was already very social with that, as well as what I perceived was he was ready, set, and go.
Speaking of the Democratic Party, who's on the top of your list for chairman?
Well, you know, a lot of names have floated up. We do have an acting chairwoman now in Grace Diaz, and right now things seem to be going okay. So everyone's on the top of my mind. One of the things of consideration is because of the governor's race that I'm sensitive to, and again, I don't control who it is, but I make recommendations and have influence, all that nuanced stuff. It's trying to not, first of all, prejudge who the nominee, because the minute you put someone in, it was a piece done in the Journal where they talk about everyone's connected to somebody, that's just Rhode Island, 2 degrees of separation rather than 6. But also in terms of you don't want it to look like instantly, he chose this person, so that means this person's getting the nomination. So the fact that you've got people that are interested, that are connected to folks, either working for them, whatever, has been a difficult process, quite frankly.
When do you make the decision on that?
Well, I think, it's something that's got to happen. I think, stay tuned. Probably, it'll definitely be in the fall.
There are a number of lawmakers who always whispered about angling to succeed you, but I'm not going to ask about who should be the next speaker. You'll say the House should decide that. I'm more curious, who impresses you among the lawmakers who aren't the Speaker of the House right now? Who do you think is particularly good, works particularly hard?
A lot of people impress me up there, in terms of, obviously, I've got a majority leader that's a hard-working man. I've got a finance chairman. Helio Mello's a hard-working chairman, and you guys know from seeing that it's not just about what people may see on the floor, but it's hours and hours of hard, detailed work. You got a Health and Human Services, a Health and Education Committee Chairman Joe McNamara is impressive, works hard. You have some younger reps in there. Chris Malajewski is a younger rep, works tenaciously hard. Joy Hearn, a great leader on education reform. Teresa Tanzi, passed the bill with her. We're looking at in terms of tax credit reviews and
I'm
really
going to stop because you'll
all
name
of these
every rep to make sure you stay on their good side.
No, but it's like you got a Kenny Marshall he was a freshman, but he was a councilman from Bristol, a council president. So he's brought an energy. His business development center we passed into law is really going to add. So you've got a lot of people, some more senior, which you would tend to think that this next speaker will come from a more seniority kind of a position. But you've got a lot of young people, a lot of new people with energy and talent, and all I'm trying to do is how do you maximize the ability of those representatives to share in decision making, to take stock of decision making, and to incentivize them to work hard.
We have less than a minute here. I got to ask you about tolling. Do you think it's realistic, the committee that is overseeing tolls right now, many members who have publicly supported it will come back and say, yeah, forget it, take the stanchions down?
Well, I'm hoping they'll look at that issue because it tends to be too parochial, and I'm hoping that'll lead to a broader discussion of transportation policy in general. And you know, we've done some things, some of it with Governor Chafee's leadership, creating transportation funds. We're not bonding so much. Gina Raimondo and I working so we can use the clean water finance to give locals a way to stretch their dollar, to accessing the state's better bond issuance. But I think that ultimately, when you add RIPTA in there, we need a real discussion on transportation policies. Bridges are a necessity, but they wear out quickly, especially when they're over salt water. There is a cost there, and we need to decide how to deal with that.
I'm disappointed you didn't bring any cake for us. House Speaker Gordon Fox is our guest. For Arlene Violet, Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.
My goodness, I could be here.